Life is like a good wine. It needs time to mature. It's meant to be enjoyed with friends and family, and you got to squeeze out every last drop. This best relates to businessman, philanthropist, author, wine enthusiast, and former England backline player Simon Halliday. Simon, it's a great pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for joining us here at the Rugby Business Network.
Yeah, great to be here.
Can you believe it's been 25 years already since you last pulled the England jersey over your head as a player? You must have plenty of stories to tell during your career, but which one would you say stands out the most?
It's tempting to say it's a particular match or, a particular win. I won 7 knockout cup finals with Bath and with Harlequins and, was played for the double Grand Slam England team. Obviously lost in the World Cup final, which was an amazing event and memory, but we lost, so it's not going to be my best memory against Australia. It's a weird one, but I think when England started to become a serious force in the late 80s, 1988, we beat Ireland by record score at Twickenham, completely against the odds. We'd lost all our matches. No one really gave us much of a hope, and we scored a load of tries. Chris Oates scored 3, and people started singing Jerusalem during the match, and that was where the Swing Low Sweet Chariot song first originated, which everyone sings now, a lot. And I remember that so much because it was a great game for all of us, and it signaled the turning point for English rugby in that era. So I always look back to that game as the one where I was privileged to play in it because it actually really led to the great success of the Will Carling teams of the early 90s.
A fantastic memory to have. Well, your club career with Bath and Harlequins, which you mentioned, as well as your years with the national team, it took place over the 80s and early 90s, which was during the time when rugby was not a professional sport like it is today. Was it difficult for you to play rugby while also having to try do work in order to make a living? And did you have any idea of the career you wanted to pursue when you retired in 1992?
Yeah, very much so. I think but lots of people know that when I left university and I played my first game for England in 1983, I then had a very bad ankle injury. And I was out game for 2 years and had to rehabilitate in military establishments, such as Headley Court, for example, to get myself back into the sport. And so I had a very early sight of things going wrong for you. I'd emerged as I did classics, modern languages at university, but I ended up working in the stock market. So I was already doing that. And when I joined Bath and stayed at Bath through my injury period and then the recovery, Bath became, for me, we were the professional club of the amateur era. When I say professional, I mean that we trained harder than anybody else. That was clear because we always won our games in the last 20 minutes. People couldn't work out how we'd score 30 points against them when we were sort of, 12 all at half time or something. We were incredibly fit. And a lot of internationals came out of that rugby club at the time. So when I retired in 92, I was already working in the stock market. I'd actually come back to London to join UBS and was marrying an international career, or the final bits of an international career. I think in my last year, I was away from the office for 3.5 months. Wow. Unpaid, obviously. The business was very happy to see me go, but I wasn't about to get any bonuses for not being in the office. And of course, English rugby was paying you nothing other than 10p a mile for petrol, and I think on overseas tours it was £10 a day, to allow you to make a few phone calls. So, I was playing in the point of time where something had to give. And it did, and the game went professional, but I was long gone by then.
Well, a quarter of a century later, you are still involved in rugby as the chairman of European Professional Club Rugby. How have things been going since you took up the position 2 years ago? And what skills as a former rugby player do you find you are using to efficiently run this organisation?
Yeah, everyone knows the history that it was the Heineken Cup, and it became a club tournament as opposed to a union tournament, and that obviously predated me, but I came in to help drive that forward. We had a new format, a new structure, a new legal setup, a completely new team, relocated to Switzerland. I mean, I could go on. A lot of new people into the organisation. So the first thing we do was to, put on a great tournament. In fact, there's two. There's the Champions Cup and the Challenge Cup, and then underneath it is, in fact, three. An Emerging Nations Cup club, knockout, which is called the Continental Shield. So I guess I've had to use all of my diplomatic skills, if you like, to make sure that everyone was pushing in the same direction, because you've got all the unions of the Northern Hemisphere, all the clubs and leagues of the Northern Hemisphere, all with separate individual agendas, clearly, because, if you run the Scottish Rugby Union, you've got a lot of things to work out, but you've also got to buy into the European club competition concept. So I guess I've tried to keep rugby at the centre of everything we do, because it sounds obvious, but in sports administration, off field, things can get derailed by politics and other agendas. So that's been my major challenge. I think we're 2 years into it, and the final, when we went to Edinburgh for the final, the two finals, would have been blown away by the quality of the games and the excitement of the crowd. And the European competition is very different to domestic tournaments. It's cross-border, it's more tribal, and you saw all of that in Edinburgh in the last finals.
Absolutely. Simon, just a few months into working at EPCR, you endured a terrifying ordeal after being admitted to hospital for emergency treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning. How did this happen, and did it affect your outlook on life in any way?
Yes, that was not one of the great moments of my life. We were, myself and my fiancée at the time were living in this flat, and we were both feeling very tired, and she's a very, very active person, and it was very unlike her, and I've got so much going on in my life that I couldn't work out how I was falling asleep on the sofa all the time. And we then we actually smelled something in the kitchen, or some noise kind of kicked off in the boiler. So we brought the guy around, and he said, "My God, you've got high levels of carbon monoxide reading. I mean, you need to go to hospital, both of you." And, he said, "Thank God you've got no children here or animals, because frankly, I'm not sure they'd be surviving this." And so we were pretty shocked. And, it was a defective boiler. It was poor maintenance. We obviously had it out with the managing agents, etc. It was a pretty shocking experience. But we both spent the day in hospital on oxygen and having arterial blood tests, which I can tell you never want to have those. And they said you've been very lucky. So we've kind of felt a bit blessed, because there are plenty of unlucky stories around that. And I've actually signed up to help ambassador a charity called Shout, which was an initiative which made people aware of carbon monoxide issues. And it's a silent killer, and happily we got through it. But you do count your blessings, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on to something a bit more pleasant and enjoyable. Not only do you have a passion for rugby, but you also have a love for wine as the co-owner of the Sporting Wine Club. On your website, www.sportingwineclub.com, it says you bring together people with a passion for sport and wine. Tell us how you go about doing this, and why did you find the need to create this club?
Well, I kind of, my background is not in wine, other than enjoying a good glass like everybody. It's very simple. I went as a supporter of the Lions Tour 2009, and Alan Lamb, the former Test cricketer, was hosting us, and he took us to Schalk Burger's wine farm. Obviously, Schalk is very well known all around the world, and his father, who played for the Springboks in the 80s, has this amazing wine farm in Wellington, the Welberdachs wine estate, and a range of wines called the Meerkat range. And I said to him, "Well, why don't you send this wine to England, given that the Meerkat advert is one of the most well-known on telly, and your estate wines are wonderful." Cut a long story short, he sent wine over here. The company he supplied didn't survive, and I thought, well, I can do two things. I can say sorry and buy it all off him, because I feel I should, or we can take the concept and So he thought, what is the concept? Well, Skulk's a former rugby international, makes great wines, and he's got a great idea of the values of life, and very supportive of sport. And his son was very, very ill a couple of years ago, so he knows all about recovery from adversity, and became got back in the Springboks team again. So we created this concept of the Sporting Wine Club, where if you can supply the club if you have an authentic connection to sport. It doesn't mean necessarily just be an ex-international. Another South African winemaker in Hermanus, the Swimridge Wine Estate, have put a rugby pitch onto the vineyard to allow a Black African township team to play there. They have no other ground to play on. So for me, that's an authentic connection. Obviously, there's other big names like Ian Botham and Sir Nick Faldo and Jimmy Anderson, the cricketer. So we've collected a portfolio, and it's a members club. We try to donate money to charity wherever we can, supply events, whether it's charitable objectives, and put opportunities in the auction that can add value for the charity involved. So it's all to do with enjoying the stories of sport, friendships, understanding what sport's about. It's not just playing it, it's all the things around it. In this case, the values of Rugby Business Network, for example, are writ large into our philosophy. So I think we've donated monies through various events across sporting charities and others, more than £50,000 this year. And I think, we feel that that's the right sort of expression of what the club's about. And we'll see. I hope it lasts for a long time, because it's got very good intentions.
Sounds absolutely amazing. Well, Simon, to top it all off, and to drive home how much of a fantastic individual you are also a patron at Help for Heroes. Why did you decide to get involved with this charity that supports those with injuries and illnesses which are sustained while serving in the British Armed Forces? Well,
as I was saying earlier, when I had my bad ankle injury, I rehabbed at Headley Court, which is very well known now, but at the time it was an RAF rehabilitation centre, and was looking after veterans from the Falkland Islands. So I learned some very early perspective when I was going through my own recovery. In 2007, I was working in the city, and the Times rugby correspondent called me up, and we were swapping, obviously our shock at the number of injuries and deaths coming from Iraq and Afghanistan, and why didn't we do a rugby match? And so, cut a long story short, we put on a rugby match at Twickenham the following year, and we weren't too sure where we would allocate the money, and someone said, "Have you heard of Help for Heroes?" Help for Heroes is just a recently formed charity trying to raise money for a swimming pool at Headley Court. Of course, I made the connection and went to Headley Court. Nothing had changed in 25 years since I'd been there for my rehab. And I said, well, let's do this. This is ideal. And, so 55,000 people later and £1.5 million later, we kind of lit a bit of a touch paper with what was a very new charity. And we then did another rugby match 3 years later to raise money for recovery centres, because we realised you can give people prosthetics and, get them out and about, but they need another base to go to understand how they're going to live their life. And so recovery centres have now been built around the country. There's 4 of them. And the second match actually which had South African players in it, and New Zealanders and Australians, because, everyone suffered in conflict, and not, we wanted it to be a more global theme. We raised another £1 million, and it kind of got me into the whole thing, and I became a patron a year or two later. So, yeah, it's been an absolutely amazing experience to see how sports people will give up their time and their efforts, in a professional world. I mean, professional cricketers and rugby players, are contracted, so to get any of them to turn up to these games is almost impossible. But, a lot of them have shown willing and to sustain, because I think sports people understand what military people go through. One injury and your life can change. That's what's happened to these guys. And so I think it's absolutely right and proper that we get involved to try and help them.
Definitely. Well, being involved in so many different areas in business and in charity, you probably come into contact with former rugby players quite often. Has it made networking for you that much easier on occasions when you've had rugby friends involved in businesses to call on?
I think that's fundamental. I think, I spent 25 to 30 years in the city and was often a reference point for, parents of rugby players or sports people, or relatives or whatever who looking to get into the world, the financial world. So I've already helped quite a bit in that area because I'm sitting there and able to make introductions. But I think the business of sport and, the way that the values of sport translate into business, that's very clear. I mean, I've lived my business life through my sporting values in many ways. And I think, we have an obligation, I think, to bring those two fields together as Rugby Business Network does, and to try and help people either at the beginning, middle, or end of their careers. They need to understand they need something else outside sport. And that's easy to say. It's not easy to do because if you're a professional, you don't get the time. But you need to create the time. The time needs to be given to you. So we need to change habits within sport to give people opportunities to look outside because, as I say, one moment they're a player, the next minute they're not. Or when their career comes to an end, they've got a long time left to make something of their lives. So I think, those two areas should come together. It's the whole concept of the RBN, and I'll do my bit to help because I was a beneficiary of people's kindness and their willingness to help me. So absolutely right to be trying to help other people.
That's so great to hear. Well, Simon, you've tackled pretty much everything that life has thrown at you, be it on the rugby field, in business, and your personal life. It makes sense then that you would use these experiences and stories to publish an autobiography, which is titled City Centre. Why did you feel the need to write this book, which covers a number of different facets of your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was... I think I was telling the umpteenth rugby story in a pub somewhere, and so this guy came up to me and said, if you tell any more stories without writing a book, I mean, you should be ashamed of yourself because you've lived through such an amazing period of time, which I did through a wonderful time down at Bath and with England, but it was also married up with a lot of adversity. A lot of benefit I got from people who helped me through business and through life. And I suddenly thought to myself, I actually should be sharing that. And why not? These are things that could, for me, get out the value and the benefits that I got from many things in my life. And also, I guess when you write a book, you do give something of yourself, and I fully appreciated I was doing that. So, people kind of feel that they said, I never met you, but I feel I know you, which I think is, in some ways, the best credit you can get having written a book. But you can't unsay what you write. It's down there in print. It is quite a personal book, but I wrote it because I felt blessed with a lot of things that happened to me, and I thought I should share those. And for people, coming on after me, who face up to some of the same kind of conflicts or challenges that I did, it was my way of saying, well, here's how I dealt with it. So if you enjoy reading, and hopefully there's enough enjoyable bits in there that make people smile as much as anything else.
Definitely worth the read. Lastly, Simon, with a flourishing career in business, what advice would you offer businesses and rugby organisations alike when it comes to helping retired players get a boost in their lives after rugby?
Well, I think it's a truism to say that the skills of sport and rugby are transferable into business, because that's clearly right. It's how you apply them. And I think, early on, 20, 25 years ago, it was the business was much less good at that type of thing. So they could really just take the raw material and it was really beneficial. Whereas now I think most people understand team-based activity. People understand, the concepts of leadership. An awful lot of courses take place for businesses to help themselves get better in that field, which is not to say they can't use the incredible ability of sports people to connect and to infuse people, to create teams, to deal with pressure and all that sort of thing. And I think my piece of advice would be to the sporting people, just because you've been in sport that does not give you an open ticket. You have to think hard about how you apply your skills to the world of business that you're looking at. And to the business people, give them a chance. Because, a lot of business people support sport. They love the values of sport. They will go to all these events. They will pay a lot of money to watch these events. They'll sponsor these events. But are you relating to the issues and challenges of sporting people that you get value from? And you have an obligation, if you're going to get involved with that sport, in this case rugby, go find these people. They're great people. They just need some help, and they in their turn will adapt hopefully to what the business challenges are.
Some fantastic advice. Well, Simon, you are a remarkable individual in all that you do, whether it be in rugby or business and even charity. And we at the Rugby Business Network wish you continued success and happiness.
Well, thank you. It's been an honour to be involved and be able to talk on these topics I'm very passionate about. So it's been great to speak to you, and thank you very much.